This is an audio sample of Saving Elianna by Teri M. Bethel. Customer reviews. The author's descriptive writing brought characters and places to life, and the story builds momentum to the very end. Well written and so true to life, it will strengthen believers' faith in the redemptive work of the cross of Jesus Christ. I highly recommend this book as an encouragement for those that are in a spiritual battle and an eye-opener for those that find themselves bound in a life of mysterious evil. Regina McCook. This is a practical guide for persons who are being tormented, firstly to realize that God loves mankind, and secondly, His desire is that we all be set free from the bondage of sin. This book clearly states the stages to transition from the kingdom of darkness into God's glorious enveloping kingdom of light. I would highly recommend this book. Christine Knowles. Chapter 1. Elianna glared at her mother as she stepped into the sanitarium's bare visitors' room. The last several times she was called to the room, there was a small table and 2 chairs in the center. Today there was nowhere to sit except on the new gray and white pebbled, linoleum floor. The attendant still cowered when she raised her hands, not knowing whether or not the pixie-thin girl with the curly dark brown hair and fiery temper would throw something at them in a fit of rage. Still reeling from the night's latest episode, she crouched on the floor, pressing her back to the corner of the blotchy white and beige wall. Her tiny frame was sore, the baggy clothes concealing the source of her pain. The voices in her head continued to whisper to her that nobody loved her or wanted her. It was like a recorder stuck on rewind. To wake up in the morning without her face feeling stiff from dried tears and crystallized mucus would be an event worth celebrating. Her head throbbed nonstop. Occasionally she opened her eyes to see if someone was pummeling her as she had been the night before. Despite the frequent reddish-purple marks showing up mostly on her back and torso, no one believed her story of the night beatings. Like her mother Elianna Santiago, they all thought it was trumped up by a sad little girl who wanted attention. Elianna stared in the direction of the attendant waiting for him to leave. She thought he didn't like her either. Nobody did. For the moment that wasn't important. What was important was the opportunity to explain the details of her attacks to her mother just one more time. After looking into her eyes, Elianna realized it would be a fruitless attempt. Eliza wanted easy explanations, something soft and sweet, like a custard that could be smoothed over a problem as though it no longer existed. If the answers did not fit into her limited knowledge base, they were pushed back or deleted from her memory banks, or so it seemed to her 16-year-old daughter. Elianna knew that her mother preferred to live in a fantasy world. For some reason, she felt more comfortable there. For the past 9 years, Eliza tried to put words to what was happening to her daughter. Now without her husband Dario at her side, mounting bills, multiple counselors, and a daughter she couldn't figure out, Eliza placed Elianna in what some would call a private sanatorium for emotionally challenged adolescents. The hospice, Brayberry House, was in the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, in a town affectionately called No Man's Land. The community was tiny. Really tiny, not one street light, but its landscape was lush and green, and the atmosphere so peaceful that you felt you were being embraced the moment you turned off the highway, onto the well-paved road leading into the Old West-looking town. NML, as the staff often called it, had a mom-and-pop shop that carried just about everything residents would need to run their modest farm homes. There was Pete's Animal Feed Store, Barney's Bar, which sported a pool table, and a lazy jukebox played with a quarter and a sharp kick to the side. The General Post Office housed a small public utilities office that served customers from 7 o'clock most mornings to 1 o'clock in the afternoon depending on whether or not Katie Wren, the middle-aged office manager, was needed to help out at Pete's during his busy season. Of course, Ralph's service station, which recently installed an ATM machine, was further up the road on a more oversized lot that looked more like a graveyard for derelict farm equipment than a thriving gas station. But that was okay. Many of the people in the town lived simple lives and often had multiple sources of income. His was repurposing old farm equipment, which brought in buyers from all over Georgia. No Man's Land's recent addition was the local sheriff's office, which had a jail cell used as a sobering tank on Saturday nights. It was purposely for a local farmer Billy Bob and his brothers when they got rowdy after a few drinks. There was no church in the town, but some families did have their private Bible studies in their homes on Sundays if they didn't care to drive 2 hours away to the closest church. All in all, there were about 200 people in the town, including the staff but not the patients at Brayberry House. Elianna would have loved to have roamed the property by herself. She would sometimes daydream about swimming in the lake behind the lead physician's cottage, living what some would consider a normal life. Gentler thoughts like these were usually interrupted by thoughts of abandonment, rejection, and feelings of no longer wanting to live. Even if Elianna could run away from the fourth floor, which she sometimes contemplated, she wouldn't know where to go. The voices in her head tried to convince her that they were the only friends she had. They claimed they would guide her through the dense bushes to freedom. Life, they whispered to her, could be over in seconds, with peace and freedom from her troubles behind her. Still, Elianna wondered why friends would encourage her to end her life, even though, at times, it seemed the only solution. The grounds were beautiful but complicated. She was sure she would end up in a worse state than she was in right now if she decided to abort her treatment, especially since she had zero communication with the outside world and just as much money. As for cell phones, they were a thing of her past. Besides, she had no one to call. Her dad left them 2 years ago without so much as a goodbye, and her mom still lived in Miami, where she planned on staying in the event her husband returned. Elianna, like the other patients, was encouraged to call home at least once every 2 weeks, an opportunity she never took advantage of. Well, who needs him anyway? Was Elianna's reflex thought about her father. In fact, it came out occasionally during her counseling sessions with the in-house shrink. Elianna thought the abuse started with her dad attacking in her sleep from she was a child. Chapter 2. Today, her mom's visit broke some of the drudgeries of being in solitary confinement even though there was no heart connection between the two of them. Eliza made the rigorous journey to see her daughter once a month, which never lasted longer than 30 minutes. Elianna wondered why she even bothered to come. And now that her mom was here, she didn't know how to tell her that she believed her dad was still beating her. It was generally after midnight when she had finally drifted off to sleep that her attacks would begin. Sometimes her bed would shake violently with Elianna bunched up in a fetal position, head covered, daring not to breathe. Other times she would feel as though someone had frozen her in time just to flog her. There was no screaming for help once this started. She couldn't move or even whisper her mother's name. At times she saw a form in the room. Other times it was an ominous presence that took her breath away. It wasn't until the presence had left her she was able to cry out for help. Elianna shuddered as she recalled last night's attack. Over the years it had gotten worse. "Hey, dollface," Eliza greeted her daughter. Her blonde hair swept back from her face in the usual bun at the nape of her neck. "Come here. I want you to meet Father Shaw, Anthony Shaw. He's here to help you get better, hon, so that you can come home." Elianna didn't give her new visitor a second glance. She turned her head towards the wall hoping the thumping would stop. Father Shaw was embarrassed, but more nauseous of the smell of the tiny room than anything else. He wasn't sure if it was the scent of vomit or old pee covered with a pine deodorizer. In any event, his stomach was in the throes of a budding somersault. Why they had the only window in the room boarded up was a brief concern to him before wrestling his attention to the fragile-looking girl, whose hair covered most of her face as she hung her head low. Eliza quickly scanned her daughter. As usual, she was wearing a tattered gray jumpsuit filled with food stains soaked deep into the grain of the fabric. It seemed no one bothered to have her daughter wash off, though making a good impression to visiting family members was a waste of time. The stains were more than likely the result of another food fight, which was probably why Elianna had landed herself in solitary confinement for the umpteenth time. Eliza didn't bother to comment on her daughter's appearance nor her confinement. It was something they had always been at odds with. Elianna was nothing like her parents, whose appearance in public was always immaculate. Nonetheless, Eliza did her best to get her daughter to settle in and allow the staff to help her get better. If she didn't, Elianna would be upgraded to a local state facility that would be closer to home, less comfortable, and less costly. Despite the toiletries she brought on her visits, it seemed like the child rarely washed or combed her hair. Her fingernails were chewed down to the stub, and her eyelashes violently pulled from her eyes, a nervous disorder she picked up recently, claiming an alien-like creature had attached itself to her eyes. Her lashes were lost in the process of peeling the creature from her face. The young girl was troubled all right, but no one took note of what she was saying. It was all too far-fetched. Not in 2006, and certainly not in Miami, Florida. Surely the stories Elianna told were from a movie she watched. It was a foregone conclusion. All demons lived in Africa. Every month, it was the same scenario. Her mother had found someone else to try their hand at reaching her tormented daughter. Eliza was well dressed in her black and white cotton, knee-length belted dress with 3 large white buttons along with her yellow patent leather purse and shoes. Elianna always thought Eliza went too far over the top with her clothes. Today she looked like she was from another era. Eliza was an attractive girl, but she had weathered over the years since marrying Dario Santiago some 16.5 years before. She claimed to love the dirt Dario walked on and would do anything for him. The longer Dario was missing, the grander her memories were of him. Elianna thought her mother would even cover for him if she knew of his wrongdoings. The closer Eliza came towards Elianna, the deeper she pressed her gaunt frame into the corner of the wall. Where was she when she needed her most? At 16, her porcelain, doll-like features looked as though she had been dragged through the wringer. Elianna wasn't afraid of her mother, she just couldn't stomach the thought of being near the woman who allowed her father to abuse her. Father Shaw walked gingerly towards the young girl. He had overheard the staff snickering about the way she had tossed the other visitors around the room like paper dolls. They wondered how long the young priest would last. "Hey," Father Shaw hoped he did not look as awkward as he felt. "I'm Father Shaw. Can we talk for a bit?" Elianna turned her head away from Father Shaw in defiance. She had enough of her mother parading people before her as though she gave a rip of her well-being. The louder the tormenting voices got, the closer Eliza came towards her. Although she hated being locked up like an animal in Brayberry House, she couldn't imagine living with her mother. Today Elianna looked 10 years older than her 16 years. Her somewhat matted curls, courtesy of her handsome father, dangled across the right side of her face, concealing the fresh bruises she garnered as she was tossed across her room the night before. Nothing had changed. Even though she had been placed in the home, the night beatings continued. No one believed her story. To them, it was just a figment of her imagination. Their solution: medicate her. She was less problematic that way. The problem was the medications intensified her insecurities as well as what they thought was paranoia. Eliza attempted to draw Father Shaw into a conversation with her daughter. When she saw him interact with the kids at St. Mary's Catholic Church, he was so vibrant that she was sure he would be the right fit to get through to her daughter. After 20 minutes of almost no communication, Eliza apologized to Father Shaw for wasting his time and showed him to the door. Quite relieved, he backed out of the room, promising to light a candle for her later that day. A recent graduate from seminary, Shaw was eager to help but realized that he was way over his head. It was beyond his comprehension how this little girl could do as much damage as the attendants had said. Eliza could not give up on her only child. She was all the family she had left since Dario's disappearance. She hoped that the day would come soon when her life would return to normal. You have just listened to an audio sample of Saving Elianna. Copies of this book are available in Nassau, Bahamas at Logos Bookstore, and in Eleuthera at Office General and the North Eleuthera Craft and Snack Place, and on Amazon.com. Get your copy today.